In 5, 3.
That's tomorrow, and that is it.
In 5, 4.
That's tomorrow, and that is it for us today. And we will leave you with I can't do it. We'll do it live.
Okay.
We'll do it live. Fuck it. Do it live. I'll write it, and we'll do it live. This thing sucks.
5, 4, 3.
End of days. The freedom of speech is being taken away.
What do you think happens somewhere after they die? Do you believe in heaven?
I never did. But the whole idea of afterlife, now I don't know. I have these dreams.
If you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed.
And welcome to a brand new life, to a brand new day, all the way from the wastelands of California. My name is Michael, and I am a mere figment of your imagination. I look forward to once again serve you those sounds of salvation. First-time listeners, turn on, tune in, and drop out. This is a different kind of show, a place where you don't feel so alone. Let us chase away the light no matter what you at home choose to believe. I do admire you for your curiosity. Live and direct right now on the TuneIn radio app. Search End of Days and you'll find the 24/7 network. My guest this evening is Leo Zagami. He is a writer and researcher who wrote a popular blog between 2006 and 2008 concerning his direct involvement with the New World Order and secret societies connected to it. His blog gained attention from people such as David Icke for its accurate, fully documented, groundbreaking inside information. Once again, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for allowing me into your hearts and into your minds. Here we are again on a night like this. Welcome back to another dose of the Michael Deacon program. Tonight will be fun. Always an honor and pleasure to be here. Thank you to everyone listening right now. Really appreciate that. Now, let's get down to brass tacks. I believe my guest is already waiting. Leo,
Hello.
Oh, there you are. Leo, what's going on?
Everything fine. I can hear you loud and clear. Thank you for having me on.
Perfect. I'm glad you could hear me.
Yep. Are we on the air now or not? When are we going on the air?
Oh, yes, we are already on the air.
Okay, great. So I'm looking forward to see what kind of topics you want to bring up today in your show. I see that you are mostly focused on the New World Order and the various developments in the satanic realm.
Oh, yes.
But please forward me any question you have. And of course, I was also remind your listeners that if they want to follow up on whatever is said today, they can read my books that you can find at Barnes & Noble or on Amazon. Leo Lyon Zagami, the Confessions, and also Pope Francis, the Last Pope. And these are all 4 books in English language that have now basically prepared the ground for the Invisible Master, which will be my 5th book in the English language coming out in October of this year. So I'm looking forward to also be able to talk a bit about that book, which is upcoming.
Yes.
But any questions you have, please let me know.
Yeah, let's talk about all of that. You are, of course, the author of many great books. You have a lot of good books, actually. I also understand you were born into a very interesting family. I thought we could sort of just go back to your roots quickly here, since I believe you have lived a very interesting life, my friend.
Well, yes. It's been overall interesting experience to join this, let's say, day and age with my present body in this embodiment. I was born into a family that, of course, had some specific connections to what is often described as the New World Order, and I would say most of all important connections with the elite and the aristocracy. So I was somehow privileged to get in contact with these important institutions like Freemasonry or also the Illuminati that somehow are inaccessible to certain levels by the ordinary folk. Though I must say that you can join, of course, your average Masonic lodge anywhere in the US. So it depends what kind of Freemasonry or what kind of Illuminati, because these days since I actually started my expose of my own experience within this group of people we define as the Illuminati, but they are a vast network of secret society that intermingle with each other and that go back hundreds, if not thousands of years. Well, I mean, this is, for me, this moment of time in history, very important to be here and be able to give a real idea of what the Illuminati really are, instead of the myth surrounding the Illuminati, which of course is a great myth. I mean, a lot of things are said. Some of them are true, some of them are not. But also because the problem sometimes is that people define the Illuminati as only the order of Adam Weishaupt, the Bavarian Illuminati, instead than then picking up on the larger context, because already 150 years ago, some authors like Stanislao de Gaeta talked about the Illuminati as a more wide range of secret societies within the Western initiatic system. And so not restricted only to Adam Weishaupt. And that actually went back a long way before Adam Weishaupt. And we know also all the implications that connect societies like the Rosicrucians with Freemasonry, or the Jesuits, which also play an important role in all this, because they are the spies of the Vatican, the magicians of the Vatican, the scientists of the Vatican. So my life was of being brought up in a traditional Catholic background amongst two parents of different nationalities, because my father Sicilian, my mother English, British, related to the Queen, my father to the Sicilian nobility, and they both got married. My grandfather, of course, was very happy. He was himself a senator of the monarchic party. So, I mean, for a senator who after Italy abandoned the republic was actually a senator of the monarchic party to let's say, get his son to marry with my mother, who was related to the Queen, it was a big thing. They got married in England, in the district of Soho, which is right at the center of London. You don't really usually these days think of marriage in the heart of London in Soho. Maybe there is some more picturesque locations, but that's where they married. And my father, a young psychiatrist, then went to Switzerland various years, and he worked very much on studying the works of Carl Gustav Jung, and also working closely with his main collaborator, who was Meyer. So, I mean, the background which I had was very vast. My grandmother from my mother's side instead was involved with Fellini and Zeffirelli and working in the cinema business, and before that in the intelligence, and during the war she was in charge of cryptography between Churchill and Roosevelt. I mean, at the height of one of the most epic moments of history, to be actually in charge of their communications meant to be a very powerful individual, for sure. I will say that overall my life was not ordinary, and I was acquainted with a non-ordinary reality, but it was very difficult for me since 2006 being able to then let's say, depict this reality and to portray it for the profane individual, the man from the street who doesn't know that certain things can happen. And that means that you have to be very careful how you start also an adventure that you don't know where it will end, because you are really, let's say, turning your back on your roots and on the protection of certain individuals when you make certain things public. So my experience was not so positive the first few years of me coming out of this closet of lies, of deception, of secret society, intelligence services, ex-Cold War assets, like the P2 members, people from the Monte Carlo Lodge, the Priory of Zion, and many other elements in all this that, of course, were, when I came out at the beginning with my small blog in 2006, I was lucky enough that it was picked up by people like David Icke.
Yeah.
So my dear friend Greg Zismansky, who is a journalist who used to work in Rome, and so he had an experience in Rome, talking about the Jesuits, the Vatican for a long time. He knew that I was talking the truth, and he found a lot of substance in what I was saying, so he gave me credit. I mentioned David Icke, but of course David Icke had a different impression of reality in my eyes, but he definitely gave me a hand because he was a pioneer in what he did. He might
true.
not, be completely 100% in tune with his reptilian theory, but of course that then was also modified, as you know, during the course of time.
Yes. Are you still in contact with David, by the way?
No, I was never really in direct contact with David. We always collaborated through other people. Of course, I worked with Chris Everard, with Enigma TV. He also worked with Chris Everard. I still collaborate with Chris Everard. And of course, but I never really had a direct contact with David Icke because I came out in a completely different, I came into the open from a completely different category of people, you see. David was somebody who picked up on me, but I wasn't coming out from that background of maybe being critical towards the New World. No, I was coming out from inside the heart of the New World Order, and David just picked up on certain articles and certain things that I put on my blog, which actually then got closed down by it was Squarespace at the time that gave me this problem. And then we transferred it to Italy, and then we had to retransfer it in America. There was a lot of moving around of my websites till at a certain point between 2008 and 2009, I decided that the main way to really get serious about getting this information out was through my books.
Very nice. Now, yes, and by the way, I'm very interested in how you got involved in the music industry.
But the music industry was something that went along with everything else, because you see, I was working within the Vatican radio establishment from a very young age, because my mother used to collaborate with Catholic radio.
Pretty unique way to get involved, by the way.
Sorry?
I was just saying that's pretty unique to get involved through that.
Yeah, well, you see, in fact, it was very interesting because I started when I was 10 years old. I actually used to read fairy tales on the radio, on the Catholic radio as a kid, because sometimes they needed children voices within fairy tales and things, so I read my part. Then later on, though, I was serving mass and everything, so of course, I have a very clear idea of the Vatican and of everything else, because I was right at the heart of it, being raised in this situation with Monsignor Mario Pieracci, who still nowadays he was the founder of the Vatican, of the Italian Episcopal TV, which is basically the second leading Vatican TV, which is called SAT 2000, which is actually the main satellite Vatican TV. And he was the founder, and I started with him. He raised me in the church, but then I liked music. One day I discovered, when I was very young, I think I was probably 10 years old, I saw for the first time these DJs from the radio, because you see, Catholic radio though used to also play a lot of music. It wasn't only prayers and hymns. There was, of course, the space for that, but there was also a lot of music and entertainment, because they were trying to attract people to it. And it was the beginning of private radio enterprise in Italy. So I started with this little radio show for kids. But then when I was 13, I asked if I could have my own radio show. And then I went into the music setup, because I was very passionate about music from a very early age, because a friend of my father, who is a famous musician, is called Anthony Walmsley, who is a bass player. He played with some of the greatest bands, but he actually was famous in Italy for playing with a group called Napoli Centrale, that later had also a guy called Pino Daniele, very famous in the Neapolitan song. And basically, he was a famous bass player, but he was also a producer of early dance music. And he had been touring since the 70s and playing with various groups. Also Alan Sorrenti with this song called Fidele Stelle, very famous also song and stuff. But what happened is that he brought me these tapes back from America. I was maybe 11, 12 years old, and I started to listen to these American radios, like Philly 99 FM, WBLS in New York, things I couldn't really listen. At that time, we had no internet, of course, guys. So just make you, you have to go back to the reality of the early 80s.
Very different times.
And a very different time. So it was the time when you go with your ghetto blaster, your 2 tapes, the music. And I used to get these tapes from America, and suddenly I wanted to be like them. I wanted to bring the radio, and so I wanted also to bring the music, and I also wanted to bring a little bit of a more, let's say, humor to the whole thing in Catholic radio. Well,
like
that got me in trouble not so long after I started my show, because I played Relax by Frankie Goes to Hollywood, and the bishop went pretty crazy on me because I played the Relax Frankie Goes to Hollywood, which of course is not really a Catholic song. But when you really see it in the context of what really goes on in the Catholic world and behind the scenes in the Vatican, that now it's so much in the open, then you see that Relax Your Body is actually a song. I knew what was going on around me in certain quarters when it came down to pedophilia in the Catholic Church from a very early age. But people like me from good families were never being touched.
Yes.
This is what happens, unfortunately, when you are in certain environments. They go for the poor children, and they go after them, and of course they methodically isolate them and make them their sexual slaves, their predators. And this, of course, make me understand that I was also shocked by certain reality, but I was also inspired by the Gospel of St. John, which was probably one of I think a piece of the gospel which I liked more, this revelation and this whole fact that there was a coming back of Jesus at one point, this Messiah that everybody was waiting, this clash between the good and the evil actually surfaced very early in my childhood. But at the same time, I was also very fascinated with magic, because in my family library I had all sorts of books on magic. So from very early age, I actually started wandering in parts of my family library that were not really open for me, but I was very curious. So
very curious, yes.
And so I started to experiment different things, and at the same time realizing that there was something in my family that they were not saying. So it took me some time, but once I, let's say, ordered my first book on magic, which was I ordered it, I was like 10. I mean, it was in parallel with me going to church. I was also into magic, because it was pretty much at a very early age. You don't expect a kid to be so, I guess these days, children are too brainwashed by today's society to wake up.
Oh yes, we'll get into that in a moment. Mm-hmm.
But let's say that the fact that I started to discover this magic in my family library, and the fact that I started to see that there was something strange behind the scenes that they were not telling me, then started to materialize once, my grandmother at that point, when I was 12, gave me my first book of Aleister Crowley. When they saw that I was drawn to that world, they then made it accessible to me. And so at that point I started to realize that there were magicians, alchemists, there was people who actually were working rituals, that my father himself was doing this kind of thing. But he was also a psychiatrist, but he also had worked very much with magic, to a point that he left psychiatry, and he actually participated in the early 80s to a TV show that used to go on in Italy, in Rome, on Teleroma 56, where he had all these esoteric people, occultists, even Dario Argento was his guest. One of the. So I mean, you had the different array of weirdos, And I still remember going to see his TV show sometimes. I mean, it was pretty late for a child, but I still liked the late. For me, I was drawn towards the night, and that was really what pushed me with then promoting my music on the radio initially for the first 2 or 3 years until I got into the club business. And by 16, I was starting to play out in clubs also. And this was a positive aspect simply because it gave me the possibility to be very early making a lot of money, especially in the 80s with this kind of thing. And also because of the connections I had, my grandmother put me in this top club where I had people like Rolling Stones coming to dance, Mick Hacknell from Simply Red and Star Council dancing around. I was just put in the middle of the elite there, you know? Yeah. And I started to see more and more things because my grandmother collaborated with William Burroughs, Brian Geisen, and so there was also around Genesis Peorage from the Temple of Psychic Youth, who was himself a friend of Anton LaVey. So I got immediately right into the heart of the problem from a very early age.
Oh, yes. Well, it's better to be weird than normal, I always say.
I know, absolutely. I think also that it just goes along with the family history. I mean, if you go and see my family background, I can go back to the time of Macbeth as my ancestor. So, I mean, the fact that you can go back for hundreds of years and see that there is a lot of people and they're all quite mad as hatters, quite out of it, all of them eccentrics. But of course, now the situation is very different. We are in the year 2018. The occult elite has implemented this obscure time for mankind in which we are suffering from this mondialism, which is also / communism, destroying the soul of the people. It's a Nazi fascism, communism, all together. These ideologies are all part of things that came out of experiments in lodges, and now they are showing their last evil cult, which is technocracy, so artificial intelligence, and the will for them to go to the next level and microchip humanity. So the fact that now the occult elite is implementing all this in front of our eyes has finally wake up a lot of people to what I also said at the beginning of my adventure on the internet in 2006 when I decided to bring out this information. Remember that it wasn't just me going and opening a blog. It didn't work out like this. It was a decision that took a long time because when you become a whistleblower, then sooner or later you're going to get in serious trouble. And that happened with me because then I was arrested in Norway for espionage.
I was just going to ask you that you had a very eventful 2008.
Yes, I mean, 10 years ago I was in a very different situation from now. While in the last 10 years I've been basically focusing on my books. I published around 20 books worldwide, 6 in Japan, now 4 in America. The 5th one is coming out. Then I published 8 or 9 books in Italy. I published a lot of books and I dedicated myself to talk about what happened previously because my life was very eventful previously. And at time very daring and very risky business because, I mean, thank God I'm still here to tell you the story. What happened in 2008 was hell on earth for me. I mean, everything, it was just a series of events that kept on. As I said, I started in 2006 with this blog. This blog, of course, must have upset some very powerful people because they were capable of sending me both the police and the intelligence service to arrest me in my house without even the judge still giving them and they actually had to put me in a car going around for like half an hour around the house waiting for the judge to put the seal, the approval stamp. And this is quite unusual. I mean, it's actually legal. And the Norwegian police should be, like proper police. You are in, you're not in Africa. You're not in what, Trump calls shithole countries. Yes. I mean, you are in Norway, which is actually one of the countries that, even Trump says is great. But instead, it's not that great. I lived there a few years, and I noticed that there was a country heavily brainwashed by the Clinton Foundation, by George Soros, by the Democrats, who had completely taken have basically used for the last 50 to 60 years Scandinavia as just an experimental ground for the various, let's say, social experiments that they can have. And but it was it was a very eventful 2008. I gave, first of all, just at the beginning of it, it started when I went to the next level, I think, with, I wasn't anymore only a blogger. I came out with that interview with Project Camelot, and that really upset some very powerful people, because the interview with Project Camelot, now people see it, there's still some YouTube channels who have some very bad copies, I must say, of it. Because it was already bad to start with, because the original one was actually confiscated when they went back to the US. They had done a backup copy with another camera. They had brought various cameras, and some of the footage was confiscated when they went back into the US. Their car was broke into after even before they arrived at my place that time. A lot of strange things happened. And then just a few weeks after, I got arrested for the first time in Norway, the day before my birthday, and they locked me up, and they were obviously trying to lock me up, but I managed to convince them that I wasn't a bad person like they were portraying I was, because they were simply trying to get me for the fact that I had this blog. When I was into the car, the Norwegian police clearly said it. You have this blog, you have to close it down. I mean, it was like a threat. They threatened me directly, and they had already threatened me a few months earlier, coming to my house in front of my ex-wife and the kids and everything. So I think that all this was very heavy situation that developed right from the beginning of the blog, which was at the end of 2006, when they came and threatened me. Then they continued harassing me into 2007. And then we got basically into 2008 that my now ex-wife went away with my son that I never saw again. And then I was accused later on, when I tried to see him, of espionage, arrested, and basically I had to flee Norway at one point, because otherwise I will have a very bad time in their prison cells.
My goodness.
And it was a very bad time. The small time I spent in isolation in prison in Norway was not very good. It was a very terrible situation. I hate every second of it, and I cursed every person that put me in that situation, but you have to be very strong also. You know that you can't do anything when you are in that kind, when you are in a prison cell, you have and it's cold, it's Norway. They didn't even give me a blanket, these bastards.
Wow. That's awful.
So it was freezing in the cold, with the lights on and always a clock in front. They put you in Norway in this prison. So you have a big clock, you can see on top so that when you see the time never goes by. If you don't have the clock in front of you, it's better, no? They put it on purpose. So you have the sense that time is so slow, So, and of course, it's a usual prison cell with the toilet in there and the usual, it's terrible. It is isolation, and every hour you have the prison guard, But then I had a revelation when I thought they are looking into my computers and stuff. They're trying to find some kind of accusation, which later on arrived, because a few months later they rearrested me, and when I went to try to see my son, and at that point I was accused of espionage full on, and I had to flee Norway. But in between all this, I also managed to come to the US for a few months. When I went around the US in 2008, I also experienced a lot of crazy adventures, I must say.
Good times.
So it was, I had forecasted earlier on in the interview, Project Camelot, that, of course, Obama will be the president, and Obama became the president. But it wasn't, because it was a good thing, simply because I knew about it, because I knew that the New World Order was pushing for that kind of agenda, which they're still trying to implement in defiance of Donald Trump. But I mean, we are now in front of a very different situation from 10 years ago, for me at least personally. The world has gone worse and worse because, unfortunately, those things that I had predicted came into fruition. And so it's obvious that these things are shocking for a lot of people, but not for the people who follow me for many years. I mean, when I, in 2006, 2007, started to say what was happening in the Vatican pedophilia network, the Pope being close to certain pedophiles, himself being involved to certain this and that. I mean, people were shocked. Nowadays, we don't understand that because so many scandals daily being served by the Catholic Church to a world audience, we become kind of immune to the whole thing.
Oh,
it's
yes.
Okay. But 10 years ago, it was shocking. And of course, we were creating waves with this kind of information in the alternative media. I'm happy that I've done this. It's not that my choice, I regret doing this, doing what I did. But I mean, it took some courage, and also I paid the consequences. So,
yes,
I mean, nobody can say I didn't pay the consequences.
Yeah, that was a very eventful 2008 for you. And back to the Vatican quickly here. As of late, well, not even as of late, for years, they've taken lots of heat, like you were saying, scandal after scandal, child trafficking, and of course, many of the priests have been protected.
But, well, yeah, I mean, my idea when I got persecuted in Norway was to go to America, then I went back to Norway, then I saw that maybe going back to Rome was the best solution, and actually to go right into the heart of the enemy, which is the Vatican. So I placed myself in an area called San Giovanni, in front of San Giovanni Laterano, which is the mother church of all churches, which basically used to be the Vatican before St. Peter's. And I just had a family flat that was brought not so long before that. And I was able to stay there for a whole year and basically be able to reach in the heart of the Vatican that information, which of course, after 15 years abroad, you lose touch maybe, though I still had a lot of informants. I used to go to the lodge in Monte Carlo. I had my informants in Freemasonry. But the fact I was actually there gave me the opportunity to go right back into the heart of the Vatican and also try to see if I could get not only other information, but also maybe change things, change. I was really believing at some point I could maybe influence this whole thing. That's where, when I had the brief collaboration with Princess Kaoru and the Vatican, we brought her to the Vatican, and the Vatican contacted me at one point, very clearly stating this: if I stop the publication of my books in Italy, I could get money from them. And I could get not only money, but I could get a very comfortable life. I will get a knighthood title and all this rubbish. Actually, I could become Grand Master even of a knighthood order that they presided over.
They try to buy you.
And they tried to buy me, yeah. I pretended for a few months while I was preparing the books that I accepted, because I didn't want to be murdered in the process.
I don't blame you.
And so I was very clever to do that, I guess, because I really mingled so close to the enemy, right, I remember, until like 10 days before the publication of the books. Then I remember there was the publication of the first volume of my Confessions in Italy, which they started with only one edition, like 1,000 copies. I think the publisher himself didn't really believe. Though in Japan it had been already a big success and it sold several thousand copies. I already had sold something like 40,000 books in Japan. What happened was that in Italy the situation was, this was my first book. And I came out with this first book, and a lot of the people that were my friends the day before, the day after, were not my friends. Because it was like, wow, Leo didn't give up, and now he's actually giving all the details in an even more accurate way. And the book skyrocketed to number one into the book sales chart. There were another 4 editions. And so at that point, I had already prepared the other 2 books to follow, and I was able to bypass all the censorship. You see, this actually worked a lot better initially than the internet, because they were not able to censor these books. Actually, they had a very wide distribution and success. Until these books then later on will be understood to be dangerous, and then they stopped the publication, persecuted, basically took them away from commerce. I had to find myself a new publisher. So, I mean, there were, of course, retaliations, even when I did the books.
Oh, yes. Now, here in America, a couple months ago, the media went on a bit of a frenzy about some UFO footage. What does the Vatican know about extraterrestrials?
Well, this is the subject of my next book, which is coming out in October of this year, the Invisible Master that I mentioned earlier on in the show. Why the Invisible Master? Because these are the puppeteers, the occult puppeteers behind the New World Order, the ones you never mentioned. What is the real reality behind the so-called alien phenomenon or the UFO phenomenon, which is connected to an esoteric reality, which gives you a different perspective to the whole thing. So you have to imagine the UFOs not as the entity, well, as the beings, but more as beings, entities that are transdimensional, interdimensional. They have portals. They can come into this dimension. They can also possess people into this dimension because of links that have been created with certain bloodlines. There is, of course, an alien interference into this world, and of course, this alien interference has been present since the beginning. So it's part of our own of all these civilizations that we have lived on this planet, the ones that we remember and the ones even that we forgot about, like right. Atlantis. So I think that. For me, it was very important when I came back to Italy to dedicate myself to do a series of groundbreaking conferences in a castle, which was near Rome. You can still find some of the footage of these conferences, which I conducted in the castle of Roviano in 2010, 2011, up to 2012, with some very important people in the UFO community, from that were, and I even managed to bring grandmasters of Freemasonry to discuss this topic, that came out also with some incredible statements and revelations during these conferences. There was people like Roberto Pinotti, who collaborates with Stephen Greer. There was a lot of interesting characters that from time to time I will manage to bring. Chris Everett came, who worked with David Icke, came there. And so we really had the possibility to see all the sides of the story, but then I wanted to I kind of viewed that there was something missing here, because you didn't have the view of somebody within the secret societies of what aliens really are. So I wanted to create the possibility for people to really understand all the connections that these secret societies, from Freemasonry to the Ordo Templi Orientis, the various Illuminati secret networks operating in the New World Order, the various fraternities that we commonly refer always as Illuminati, all this is linked to an alien agenda that also is linked to an interdimensional agenda, which is linked to what is happening in CERN in Switzerland, which is linked to certain rituals that can open these portals, like Aleister Crowley did in the desert. All these things, for the first time, I put in a book to really show that the reality is very different, that we are in front of a subject that is it's somehow misunderstood because it is very complex, of course, and because this link that certain secret societies operating within the Illuminati network had with these beings has been for thousands of years. So also their way of communicating, evoking them, interacting with them, and also making sure that they are working on their behalf on certain things. So the Invisible Master is this alien, so-called alien figure behind the scenes. And that's why I then dedicated the whole of the last chapter of this book to the Vatican, because the Vatican is open up to this phenomenon, which is the UFO alien phenomenon.
Yes.
And has been doing this with a series of conferences in this Church of Sant'Anna, which is a very important church within the Vatican, but it's considered like kind of like the entrance of the Vatican. So the church that stands in between the Italian and the Vatican State, but just the first church when you get into the Vatican. They started these conferences, and it's been interesting to see how the Vatican has gradually opened up, also with the latest Jesuit who has taken the position of the Specula Vaticana, head of the Specula Vaticana, because the Jesuits are in charge of the astronomical laboratory, of the astronomical observatories. They are in charge of monitoring the UFO phenomenon. And when I asked them why they were in charge of this phenomenon, they said because it's directly linked to the prophecies.
That's really interesting.
So, this was a confirmation which was given to me by an agent of the Jesuits, who is a guy who works officially for the Vatican, who Pope John Paul II used to call the man of the Holy Spirit. It's called Antonio Leonardo Montuoro. And so when he confirmed me that, I understood I was absolutely right about everything that I had been doing, because it was very important that I explained that entities like jinn, demons, and so a demonic reality is totally connected to the alien reality, and so it's also very dangerous for humanity to start dealing with these entities that have, of course, completely now invaded our dimension and control the reality through technology, because they are filtering this technology to us in a way that they can then use it to manipulate our reality. They are basically controlling us very easily. We think that we are subject to some kind of maybe, announcement that there is an arrival of aliens, but they are basically always been here, and they are now controlling us more than ever, because the technology that we are using is coming from them, and so they control it.
And when is this book coming out, by the way?
The book is coming out in the fall. The book is called The Invisible Master on CCC Publishing, which is this publishing company that has courageously brought out my books in the US, which is based in San Francisco. And The Invisible Master is, as I said, the last of the 5 books of this that I do in the English language for this publisher, that has given me the possibility, also thanks to common friends like Sean Stone, the son of Oliver Stone, to be able to translate these books and make them available into the English language, which was deemed very important. When I came to the US the last time in 2014, what happened was very interesting, because I stayed there for like 3 months in Los Angeles, and meeting with several people in Hollywood, I saw that there was a great interest in my work from very important people, also key people in the industry and so on, because a lot of them understood what was coming to them soon, because we knew that there was pedophilia, satanism, cannibalism in Hollywood. And there were certain people, let's say, good people, like Oliver Stone, but his son, and other good people in Hollywood, because there is also good people in Hollywood. It's not all democratic scam. Well, I will not say it's not a political thing. It's a satanic scam. You can call it whatever you want, but it's basically satanic. But there is also good people in Hollywood. Those good people that are also Freemasons, but Freemasons that are good Freemasons, because you have bad Freemasons, good Freemasons. They said, Leo, well, I mean, they really made an effort to make me feel at home and to give me the possibility to then release this book, publish this book. So I think that my mission, at least, of being able to bring out my story has been accomplished after 10 years. I'm very happy about that, because like you remember, 2008 was very important for me. Of course, it took more than 10 years to bring out all the information I had from that famous from that blog in 2006, my first blog, when I started to bring out things, and then they censored, and then I put it somewhere else, and it was. But at one point, they were trying to really get this information to disappear.
Oh,
They
yeah.
even entered my, I had an Apple Mac with an old Power PC, not an Intel processor, so they are almost impossible to attack. And people from the Intel community know that still nowadays very well. And they managed to get my hard disk to literally go on fire one day from a distance to blow the information I had in it.
Wow. Yeah.
So
in 2008, they really tried to break you there.
Well, they tried, but I was resilient. I managed, for example, to save that hard disk, and through a friend of mine who was an Apple developer to actually get it saved, and led to saving a lot of the information that then became key information in my confession series. So I can say that then 2009, later, I say 2008 was also a good year in some ways when I kind of was able to go back to Italy, because I think that in the end, after 15 years abroad, coming back to Italy and close to the Vatican in this moment of time was very important for me, because I also managed to relaunch myself completely in a different way in Italy, where I was known as a record producer, of course, as a DJ at a national level. I was very famous, yes, but I was not known as... having said that, I had worked in the 80s as a journalist, and since the 80s, I also in the 90s, because when I started the radio later on, I went into journalism also. Parallel to my DJing and my record production, I was always collaborating with a famous Italian journalist called Dino D'Arcangelo, who now unfortunately is not with us anymore, who worked for La Repubblica. And so he taught me really the basis of journalism. And I went into gradually more and more into the I even used to read the news for the radio at one point in the 80s, you know, when I was involved into the radio. So I mean I had a basis as a journalist, and I wanted to develop it as an investigative journalist based on my own experiences. This was a very particular kind of experiment, let me tell you. Because it's not like, you know. So when I launched this blog in 2006, it had been planned for several years since 2003. Because it was from 2003 that I started to see that there was a growing need for me fighting this war. And I tell you, one of the most inspiring moments was when Alex Jones went into the Bohemian Grove. Why is that an inspiring moment? Not because, it was showing something that for people within the secret societies was unknown, but because it showed it to the rest of the world, and it created actually discussions within the secret societies and even within Freemasonry. So this debate that started to happen was very interesting. I mean, I remember discussing Alex Jones and his infiltration of the Bohemian Grove within the United Lodge of England. I even remember with who. I think I have to refresh my mind, but I think at least Tony Henley and another guy from the UBS, the famous, actually from the Warburg Institute. And so many people, we were already discussing this thing, and then I discussed it at the Monte Carlo Lodge. We discussed it very vividly at the Monte Carlo Lodge. And then it became a subject that made me clash with my enemies. Right within, when I was still in the fold, I remember there was a conference of the Monte Carlo Lodge in this convent, in this monastery. There were around 90 Freemasons. The elite of Italian Freemasonry was gathered in this big room that the monks had given us with this great painting behind, and I remember that I was one of the main speakers that day as the Grand Master of the Order Illuminatorum Universalis, and I got to criticize openly what was happening in America, and I demanded that some clarity from the brothers in the U.S. What was going on with this Bohemian Grove stuff, and also what was going on with Skull and Bones. I mean, all these things were starting to surface at an increasing rate. The BBC had managed in 2003 to 2002, I think, to get into the Skull and Bones and make some recordings. So even within the fold of Freemasonry and other secret societies, these things started to create some kind of discussion. And I felt the need for me to come out of the fold and then denounce it and make sure that I could give my own clarity to this topic, which I think was important because I gave the insider's view before anybody else. Nowadays, you go on the internet, I see every day new Illuminati, whistleblowers, insiders, but I think that you have to judge all these people by the results of their information, if it is accurate or not, and if they're bringing documents that are verifiable photos. This is what my enemies disliked of me, that I was bringing evidence, and this evidence was pretty dangerous.
Yeah, what a weird place, by the way.
To do what? Sorry.
The Bohemian Grove. I'm just saying it's a very odd place.
In 2008 always, and we go back to 2008 like it's the year that it all happened then.
Golden year.
The golden year of Leo Zagami. In 2008, which is also the year I met my future wife, by the way. So, I mean, it's been 10 years that I actually kind of intercepted her once. we met after my visit in Colorado, where I actually met a high priest of the Bohemian Grove. And this was it's something I talked about in volume 1 of my Confessions. I don't know if you read about it.
Yes, I read that book, actually.
I guess that in volume 1 of my Confessions, I discussed my experience into the house of the high priest one of the high priests of the Bohemian Grove. It was pretty scary. I mean, at one point, I didn't know if I would come out alive from there, but it was a pretty far out experience when I understood that the Bohemian Grove is nothing compared to what these people get behind closed doors. I mean, the high priest of the Bohemian Grove was also a member of one of the most infamous witches' covens in Great Britain, and of the secret society called Cultus Sabbati, which is one of the most satanic societies.
That's correct.
So, I mean, it was, an experience to be in his house, because I saw with my own eyes what is considered the second largest occult library in the U.S. It was enormous. It was incredible, the rarity of the books, the extent of the work, and all this in a place called Loveland in Colorado, and near Fort Collins. I mean, it's just, nobody will think that you have an occult library there, in somebody's underground setup. But I mean, I was impressed with also finding a person that this occultist that recognized that at one point maybe I wasn't on his, let's say, idea, but then because they could have killed me, definitely. Especially when I discovered that this guy was linked to Nicolas Cage, that the whole thing was linked to the whole Hollywood elite and occult mafia over there, and that I was basically starting to put together the dots. So this was, in a way, scary, I guess, for some people.
Oh, yeah. I agree. It is a little bit scary. And what's your perspective on all the sexual scandals stemming from Hollywood currently going on?
The sexual scandals, as I said, for me, it was just a moment, it was just a moment of realization of something that though everybody knew for a long time, because I even had written a book which I haven't published in the English language, but I published in Italy, called Illuminati and the Music of Hollywood, where I denounced all the manipulation going on in Hollywood and people even like Oprah Winfrey and that have their own say in this new world order. And of course, we saw that Weinstein was the friend of Oprah Winfrey, and that even Oprah Winfrey was kind of pimping around for Weinstein, and that the whole thing just disgraceful. But I mean, you have even worse in Hollywood. You have people who dedicate themselves to cannibalism, who promote it, like Katy Perry. I mean, you have a bunch of sick individuals, and these sick individuals thought they were untouchable for many, many, many decades. I think since the establishment of Hollywood itself, that Hollywood has resembled a modern Babylon, and so for that reason, everything is tolerated in Hollywood. But now they have lost a lot of credibility. And I think that the main reason for all this has been because Donald J. Trump has unleashed on them the power of the intelligence agencies, which have exposed all their dirty deeds.
I'm not very kind, personally, about Hollywood and celebrities. I actually do a celebrity death pool here on the program.
No, I mean...
It's not very, it's a little tasteless, but humorous at the same time.
Oh, yeah? Well, I mean, as I said, my experience of Hollywood is this, that they live a great life, but they are not in touch with reality. So they have no absolute... For me, I think personally, they shouldn't even mention politics in their daily agenda, because they don't know what's really going on in the country. They are privileged people. They should just thank God that they are in that position. Instead, they have wage war against Donald J. Trump. Well, then if you wage war, you get war back. I mean, that's how it works.
It's true.
So I think that now people have realized really that Hollywood is just a propaganda machine in the hands of people like Soros, the Mondialists, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, and up until the end, David Rockefeller showed his defiant role in the New World Order, just as Henry Kissinger does every week. And these characters are pretty spooky characters because they are ancient nearly. They are like dinosaurs, but they are still dangerous, and they still seem to hold together this plan for a globalist nightmare, because it's a prison made of technology that just imposes on mankind to become a number and to become a slave to a machine.
Right. Now, how do the regular citizens in Romania feel about Donald Trump?
Romania?
Yes.
Why you ask me about Romania? You maybe know my connection with Romania.
Yes.
I have some connection with Romania because I'm an honorary member of one of their Supreme Councils of the 33rd degree. I have many Freemason friends in Romania, participate in Romania. How they intend Donald Trump? Well, they see him very positively in Romania because they hate George Soros. George Soros, as you know, is Hungarian.
Correct.
And he has been promoting the stealing land that now is Romanian to bring it back to Hungary and so on. And so he's not really somebody who is very popular even in Romania. In Hungary, it's definitely not popular anymore in Hungary. I mean, he's getting more and more hated in his own, where he comes from, because they see the evil that he promotes every day. The populations of Europe live on their own skin every day, the manipulations of George Soros. When just a few hours ago, I saw an article regarding Soros promoting basically a counter Brexit operation, which aims to make the Brexit go back from the Brexit. So disintegrate the result of a great choice made by the British people. Why? Because it doesn't fit into the scheme of things of George Soros. This is terrible. I mean, and then you have Nathan Rothschild. I mean, geez, man, these people are just nightmares. Just dinosaurs from a bygone era, from the Cold War, that are still here, and they want to impose on us what is unfortunately a communistic society. It's a left-wing nightmare that is being promoted since 1968, since the moment they managed to infiltrate the universities and impose this left-wing rubbish that everybody thinks is cool. So they manipulate the desperados, anarchists in the squats from their most remote parts of Europe. They are in with the right wing, with the left wing, with everybody. They manipulate all of them against each other, and then they are the ones who are really in control of everything. They are the bureaucrats of this technocracy, this growing technocracy that is destroying this, let's say, the sovereign state in favor of these continental states that they are laying the foundations for. in this, America is, of course, resilient because it's a continent and because they have the capacity to stand against this if you have the right person. If you have Hillary Clinton, they will all go to hell. Or if you have there Pocahontas, whatever her name is, or if you have anybody else from the Obamian, Obama's been a nightmare. This guy was the most useful idiot of the whole show. Really, shame on him. The guy got even in Oslo a Nobel Peace Prize, and he was such a warmonger. People died left, right, and center because of the choices he made and Hillary Clinton. And Hillary Clinton is a witch.
Well, I can't deny that. So,
people might not dislike Donald J. Trump, but he's the only one who is, because he's such he's a self-made man, billionaire, who has risked his own fortune over and over again. And he has done it in a way that is nearly on the border of being, it's like really risky to do certain operations like the way he did it, but he did it in a fearless way. And in the end, it worked out because he reached the White House, and what he said in the electoral campaign, he's actually manifesting. In my books, volume 1, 2, I hardly mentioned Trump, if not the fact that he will probably arrive at the White House because they were published before, and start what the media will probably transform in the longest reality show ever, which is the case. But then in volume 3, which came out just after his election, I also explained the people that were corrupt within his own maybe system, but at the same time his great legacy and his work that he's trying to do to preserve certain aspects of our civilization, of our Western civilization, that are under threat. Because Italy knows it very well. Here we are on the front line of immigration every day, growing social unrest. Thousands of blacks arriving from the jungle. We are not talking about slaves, guys. Nobody has gone there and picked them up with some boat and put them on a boat. These people are coming voluntarily, and they are not poor. They have been chosen by their families to pay a certain sum, and they usually are very healthy, black, adult, very strong guys, arrive here in Europe, thrown into a reality which is very hard, especially in Southern Europe, because there is no work, because there is a growing crisis, and they end up filling up, of course, the criminal activities with drugs and so on. And this is becoming so unacceptable, especially when it was 10 days ago, we had the scandal in Italy, big shocking news about this black pusher cutting this girl, putting it after what seems for a lot of peculiarities a voodoo ritual, because also this Nigerian mafia that's invading Italy is practicing black magic left, right, and center. So this girl was then bleached to not leave any traces, but her internal organs were taken in a way that is typical of certain rituals in the Nigerian tradition. What happened a couple of days later is normal. One Italian got pissed off. He picked up a gun and started to shoot at all blacks in one town. Now, this is not an act that we can accept in a civil world. People can't go around shooting. But you have to understand that we are here in Italy in 2018 facing an immigration warfare soon, because this is not the Italy we know, because we are a small country, because we have 60 million individuals in a very small space. Imagine how many people you are in the US.
Oh my.
You're not more than 240, I think,
right.
Millions. Okay? And you are in such a big space with big horizons, big, everything is big.
Yes.
In Italy, it's a little thing like this, and we have 60 million people. On top of this, half of Africa is arriving on top of us. So if this is not stopped, I think that we're going towards a complete disaster. And George Soros is sponsoring this. He's sponsoring the boats that pick them up in Africa. They had to be stopped. Italian politicians had to actually threaten even the EU at one point, because this is not acceptable, and we are facing the possibility that Europe is invaded by Islamic forces, which will constitute a complete change for the basis of our Western society. If Europe is to be considered the Christian base of our society, because it is, that then develop later in America, because that's history, no? It's not like, that's how things worked out. Now, Europe is again under the threat of the Muslims. Now, you might see it in a different way in America, but in Europe, we fought the Muslims for thousands of years. People from my family who were in the Knights of Malta fought the war that stopped them 500 years ago, risking their life to block these people from invading our own civilization and our own culture. Now their mosques are everywhere. They create areas where they only have their own laws, the Sharia, in the heart of Europe. This is not acceptable. So I think we're going towards a complete social disaster, but this is, of course, manipulated by a new world order which knows exactly what they're doing.
I might get in trouble for saying this, but the Prophet Muhammad is a pedophile. Absolutely.
You're talking about a pedophile here. Prophet Muhammad is a pedophile, is a guy who indulged in pedophilia, married a very 9-year-old girl. I mean, it's scandalous what this guy was able to do, and is accepted by everybody like a prophet, when in reality you go and study the reality of it, and he was a pedophile. And so to actually have a religion that promotes pedophilia is ideal, though, for those people in the Vatican who love pedophilia. So you see, a lot of cardinals have sold out to Islam in secret a long time ago, because they like Islam. They like the fact that it's a religion of perverts. It's a religion of perverts where recently Erdogan, the president of Turkey, has said it's okay to marry a 9-year-old girl. That is what's happening in Turkey. At the same time, in most countries, they continue the terrible, of course, tradition of, we know, so I mean, how you say, female genitalia removal.
Oh my, yes.
And at the same time, though, they condone, for example, anal intercourse before wedding because they have to stay virgin, or I don't know what. I mean, there is some really far-out beliefs of hypocrisy in a world that, that sees also the biggest perverts, because you just go to Saudi Arabia and they're all lined up. The princess of Saudi Arabia, a bunch of perverts.
Oh, yes. I agree 100% with that.
And they are tolerated. Why they're tolerated? Because they give us oil. So I think that, you see, the problem here is that we tolerate because in exchange we have something. When Hollywood for years has promoted the tolerance toward the film director like Roman Polanski, who is a Satanist, but not an hypothetical Satanist. He was there at the foundation of the Church of Satan with Anton LaVey. And of course he was active in Satanism, and he participated to raping a 13-year-old girl in the way he did, and it's made acceptable because Hollywood wanted to promote this acceptance of pedophilia. Unfortunately, it's being pushed by these lobbies, very powerful, of very rich people who want to normalize the acceptance of this evil practice.
Yes. Now, Leo, I did want to ask you about this, since you are a controversial figure. You would agree with me on that, right?
Of course. I mean, everybody that says their own opinion without being censored these days is a controversial figure.
Right.
They try to censor, but at least in these shows like yours or others, I managed to say the truth, and it's definitely not convenient. The problem now for me is to get my idea through to the mainstream, because unfortunately they're making it impossible for me to reclaim my position. For example, here in Italy, where I had, let's say, after I came back in 2008, 2009, I had managed to create also regular appearances on TV in Italy and so on, until, of course, they realized it was too dangerous. They took a few years to realize that, because it was at the end of 2013 that they realized that. But when they realized, they basically banned me from every TV or radio show in the country.
Yes, and being a controversial figure, many people on the internet will, of course, go on the attack. And you, like many before you, of course, have been accused of being a CIA disinformation agent. I myself have been accused of the same thing since 2014, which is ridiculous. What do you say to those people who actually think that about you, Leo?
I wish they sent me a check in the mail.
That's what I say, yeah.
It's interesting that people can think that. Of course, there is been contacts with the intelligence world. I mean, I always talked about it in my books. I was quite open about all the connections that I had with the intelligence community. But to actually say that I've been their own tool, well, I mean, at least that I know, no. Do they mind control me? I don't think so, because otherwise I would have probably have done many different idiotic things. Though I must say that at one point when in Italy the situation politically got very, very heavy, especially when I entered politics, and I then was part of this pitchforks revolution that blockaded the country for 2 months, and I was on TV, and but not anymore as, let's say, an intellectual or somebody who wrote books. Suddenly I was also in the political arena, and that was not something they liked very much. And they poisoned me, they tried to manipulate what I was saying, they locked me up. It took me like 2 weeks to get out of this hell's place where they locked me up. I had lawyers, 3 lawyers tried to get me out there. I mean, I had torture with these doctors playing me communist hymns in the morning. It was, I mean, and
wow.
then they said in front of my lawyer, we work for the Tavistock Institute. That was the best part of it, because I said, listen guys, if you say it in front of my lawyer, I can put it on my next book. That was the only positive thing of this whole thing. But the Tavistock Institute, which maybe some of your listeners will know, is a very dangerous place created in Great Britain to, let's say, social engineer the whole of humanity in a way. It was the predecessor to what then became experiment in the MK Ultra and in the various projects of mind control and manipulation under the U.S. intelligence agencies.
That seems to never have gone away. It seems like the media and the internet, social media, all these places manipulate those who aren't aware of it. I believe 75 to 85% of the population here and probably outside of America are completely brainwashed, Leo.
Yes, unfortunately that is due to the fact that the media are firmly in their hands, you see. So brainwashing comes from the media, from the fact that the system is completely rigged. Like
compromised, yeah.
It's rigged. I mean, if you try to change things, you will see always this system is rigged, meaning that they have a way to get back to you and put things back into place like you never were there and you never said those things. And of course, I created maybe stronger waves than others. But that's why at one point in the beginning of 2014, before I then later came to America, because I was desperate to just get away from all this, I got the Italian Carabinieri, which is like the police, military police, to break into my house, destroying the front door like I was a terrorist, breaking into like I don't know what, and treating me like such. That was something that I dislike of this whole thing. That they in 2014, they tried once again to ruin my credibility, and they managed to a certain extent for a limited period of time. Then I went to America, where I have fortunately many friends. I went back to Italy and I courageously started again. But I even had to find a new publisher because they had managed to even I had 3 different publishers, and only one of them in the end managed to keep one of my books, even if there was sabotage left, right, and center by the co-author also. I mean, they got close people to me to do things that I didn't think it was possible. It's terrible to see that they are up, when you're up to people who can be really evil, but all the way,
Oh, yes. Now, Leo, we are coming to a close here on the interview. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I do want to ask you one other thing, and that's, how do you want to be remembered when all of this is said and done?
I want to be remembered as the person who tried to do what, to follow the example, let's say a person that follows the example of Christ in a way that maybe others have not. I have followed it in the same way because I think that I renounced like him in the desert to the riches and fame of having the material kingdom the moment in which I went against this great establishment. And I was very conscious of doing that decision. So I renounced to the material power in that moment. But I will maybe be remembered because what I'm planting here are the seeds for something that will last a lot more than just the materialistic construct that you have in front of you. I mean, I'm trying to lay the foundations here for the preservation of the empire to come, which is the empire of the 1,000 years that we hope will soon overcome this evil. There is going to be a peak moment in which this evil operates, and we see it in front of our eyes every day, getting more and more evil, worse and worse. You have all the signs for this catastrophe, impending catastrophes around the world, and signs of the end times. So some people say, he's very messianic, very apocalyptic. Well, let me tell you, we are living in certain times that are unprecedented. And I'm glad that I live in these times. So if you tell me how people should remember me, like somebody who has been courageous enough to never accept a compromise with the enemy. Because the enemy has always offered the possibility of a compromise. I might have limited my terrestrial benefits in the sense that I don't have the material wealth that usually is associated with people of my bloodline. Though I must thank God that I'm still in good health and then I have enough. See, this fact of having enough, for me, is good. I mean, actually I live very well, a very good life compared to the poor people around the world. I'm still a privileged individual. That little that I have is a lot more than what maybe a lot of ordinary folks have. And I thank God for that. And I think that my son or the people who come after me and that they will read my books in the future and see what has happened in this day and age, which I'm trying to paint like a painter, paints his paintings. I'm writing my books. I try to pick up this whole situation and show you that it's not, there is a different reality from the one that is perceived. Maybe there is another way of interpreting history. There is another reality that should be taken into serious consideration, and that I'm sure in the future will be taken into much more serious consideration. Because I think that a lot of things that now people are laughing of, thinking they're topics that can just bring like some curiosity, like the alien topic we touched earlier on in the show, or the fact that there is a new world order or these secret societies. Well, people tend to always think of all this in front of a very light scenario made of maybe a bag of popcorn and a nice movie that is about all these kind of things, but you're just watching a movie, so that's fine. No, the thing is that then there is a reality here that is even more interesting than the movies themselves. And this reality is lived by people like me who are trying to bring you a little insight into this great reality that is untold, because everybody's scared of telling it. Everybody's scared of losing by telling the truth. I have not been scared of telling the truth. So if I had to sentence in one phrase and 2 words, what I'm really trying to do, I'm trying to live by know the truth, and the truth should set you free. And this passage of the gospel is still my motto, and is still what I'm living with and for.
Very nice. I think many people out there appreciate the fact that you never let them break your will, Leo.
Yeah, the will has to be completely strong. It's the will that really makes some great changes for humanity. Sometimes this will can be brought to the most evil extent. Let's watch in the case of Adolf Hitler. Sometimes it can be brought to a good extent, to a good solution. Now, I am 48. I know, maybe I'm halfway through my life.
You're still a young guy, don't worry.
Still a young guy. But I think that in the future, maybe things can change. Maybe we can live a better reality. Who knows? I will hope for the whole of humanity that's the case. So I thank very much your listeners and everybody that has bothered with listening my rants over all our past experiences. But it was a good experience to have this interview, and I thank you very much for having me on your show.
Clockwise, my friend. That's leozagami.com for those who want to check out further work from our guest here. And of course, thank you, and I really appreciate the time you spend here, and we'll do it again in the near future, my friend.
Thank you very much. All the best. Ciao, Mago.
All right, Leo. Godspeed. Take care. And that, of course, was Elio Zagami, ladies and gentlemen. Great guest there. And, of course, I want to inform you that I will be having another show later on tonight here at, I believe, 7 p.m. Don't miss that. Let me remind you that you can go back to michaeldeacon.com to check out any previous show that you might have missed. This program completely depends on its listeners. That means you right there. Spread the word, be a friend, and share. And with that said, the world is a mysterious place, and life itself is a mystery. Until next time, good night, everybody.
Right in the court is hard out. I'm not that way. I'm a Christian. Drop out of college. Drop out of graduate school. Drop out of
You mentioned the Illuminati, and we won't go into behind them, but the Illuminati certainly is part of the whole thing. The top members of the Illuminati are open worshippers of Lucifer.
I could tell that all the mainstream media outlets were giving me like bullshit. Like you can just see it. It's clear.
How appropriate. I wish I could be in that ring with Hogan right now.
It's crazy. I had no idea this shit existed before 726.
Oh, a Grammy. I like Grammy. I'm gonna keep it real.
A lot of good content. A lot of cool topics. I feel, fortunate to have an opportunity to speak to you guys tonight.
You guys are really big.
Yeah, Mr. Rusev. That son of a bitch. I like that, man.
It's the simplest shit. You go in there, you see the bartender, you wear all the time, and then I think, well, you're comfortable. I'll bring you by comfortable.
Just for what it's worth, I want to put in my 2 cents at the justice that you have. One of the most incredibly well-rounded shows.
Other men. 22 years old, still a virgin.
Guess what, motherfucker?
Successfully erased.